Some more weird books. I hope looking at this section isn't totally killing the channel. Sorry, everyone. I have some weird books. They're kind of interesting. They're part of the strange world you live in. Again, I used to write a column, My Strange New Mexico, and I find a lot of this stuff very interesting. My column's name was riffing on this documentary's title. This is a promotional card for this documentary, preserved in a collage from the 90s. That's the cover of a script I wrote in high school that I was going to make with my friends. We started but never finished. Orbits. It was a drink that had things suspended in it like bobas, but I don't think they've gotten it down yet. You're asking why you were stuck with the nerds could be part of your problem. As an ex-nerd, I feel you're probably passing by a lot of guys you'd like if you looked past the nerd cover and got to know them. Ah, Tyrone. Oh yeah, my friends and I were going to all these Hare Krishna meetings down in town to scandalize our religious families. And it was they were kind of fun. Great music. And they had some points about appetite and the senses and so on that I still think about. I always loved David Byrne. Roots Rock was having a moment. More Hare Krishna stuff. 90s. Some comic. Yeah, the name came from this obscure documentary. Hey, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment got its name from an obscure paper. Now obscure. Then probably people had heard of it. It's called On Crime and Punishment, blah, blah, blah. I had no idea how to format a screenplay back in the day. I don't think I'd ever seen a screenplay. I wrote this when I was 16, 15 maybe. Mom, how was school? Thurston Freshen. I'll tell you after school starts in September. What'd you say again? I didn't hear. I was stirring the food, and I hate to miss even a word of Dr. Laura. She's her kid's mom. Oh, man. My mom was really offended by me writing this. My brother Rob went right to her and was like, he basically wrote a version of you into this. She's always ignoring her kids to listen to Dr. Laura. Doesn't know anything about their lives. My mom took it as an insult. That's not how she was. She did listen to dumb talk radio stuff. Why did Dr. Laura go off the air again? I wonder if there's an interesting Wikipedia page to look up about that. This was before that. I wrote the scene for my kind of macho friend Wade. Made him the king of the flowers in some daydream. Yeah, I had no idea how to format a script. That's funny. Scene 44. It's probably all lowercase, right? When you number the scenes. Center oriented, of course. Font shouldn't matter. It actually functions as description, though. Even knowing what I know now of screenwriting. No, I'd give Ned his own line, because you change actors, and then I'd give it splatters when it hits the road. Its own line, and I'd change the verb, the noun there, so that it has kind of a centered thing. It'd be 3 spaced out lines, left oriented. Exterior street. Oh yeah, you need to do the slug line. Day. Sorry for that indulgence, folks. I just got that out because I just wanted to reference the source of the name of the column, and it comes up again and again in this section. All right, let's look at shelf 2 of the weird books. Actually, I added one to the other shelf. 2 if you count one of those Carlos Allende books. So this is like a really far out work that has been, some of the nonfiction claims of it have been disproven, I've read. Oh my gosh, what an amazing cover. I'm proud of its Americanness. Oh yeah, a young man's remarkable account of his experiences with hallucinatory drugs of the Southwest. A very strange, utterly absorbing book. Quite likely it will become a classic. Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui way of knowledge. So yeah, a lot of, maybe the teacher in here was never literally true, but he's talking about some really powerful, interesting things, and the strange powers that hallucinogenic plants can have, and the way that they affect consciousness and stuff. I happen to know of a local book group in Albuquerque who had this included as one of their selections of their large group. And it encouraged everyone in that group. I was not in this group, but it encouraged everyone in this group to start taking psychedelic mushrooms. And the group got much, much stranger, is what I hear. And shifted their focus a bit. And it affected everybody's lives. So anyway, I just moved this recently from the paperback project over to the weird book. If this book's going to be over in the weird books, then these should be together. This is drawing from this, I hear. Crack in the egg enters into universal creation, cosmic energy, Don Juan's teaching. Yep. But how strange it is to be anything at all. The world might not only be stranger than we know, it might be stranger than we can know. It never got weird enough for me. These are all quotes I like. I have to read this just because this book is so beautiful. I did read it a long time ago. You know, his book that I read that I liked is called Tales of Power. And I liked that one and got into that because it was in part about lucid dreaming. And I'm fascinated by lucid dreaming. What is going on with lucid dreams? There's a great, like, This American Life episode about this lucid dreaming, about a guy who confronted this ominous figure that kept recurring in his dreams by getting into lucid dreaming. That's where you can control your dreams a bit and bring an awareness to them. It's incredible. It's not that hard to do, lucid dreaming, but to get good at it, you have to do a lot of practice. You have to tell yourself as you fall asleep, really like a mantra, I will be aware and lucid in my dreams tonight. I will be aware and lucid in my dreams tonight. I will be aware and lucid in my dreams tonight. I will be aware and lucid in my dreams tonight. And you need to give yourself a little assignment, like putting your hands palm up in front of you and looking at your hands, studying your hands, or imagining yourself at a crossroads and turning left. You know, you need to do something that gives yourself autonomy in your dreams and helps you access that. But if you start getting good at this and working on it, it'll just wake you up like crazy. The better I've gotten at it, the more it just like ruins my sleep for the night. And I'm like, well, do I want this magic power to be like Moon Knight or whatever? Or do I want a good 6 hours? Because I got to get up early. This book cover, this should win some awards or something. Used to belong to Sally in 1973. Don Juan was a Yaqui Indian from Sonora, Mexico. Medicine man. Carlos Castaneda was a graduate student. 1968. God, I love a 1960s paperback. Oh, wait, this is a 70s reprint. 73. If Don Juan was fictional, it's amazing. He dedicated it to an anthropological introductory framing of it. Yeah, probably the kind of book that could change your life. Take you down some wild paths. Shelf 2. Weird books. Hey, real quick. Looked at this briefly in previous videos, connected to the P.O. box of my childhood. When an Arcturian channeler, Tuella, had the P.O. box before my family had it. And here's her book, also looked at in a previous video. I love this thing on the back. Predicted to occur by the year 2000. I used to have this paperback called 88 Reasons the Rapture Will Occur by 1988. Big swing prophecies are great, you know. Look up the founders of Seventh-day Adventism, the founder, if you want a big story of that. In the year 2000, compiled through Tuella by the Ashtar Command. Okay, so she would channel the messages of the aliens. And again, Tuella is the star of this book. You know, you really can't understand the modern West without understanding the interesting element that the New Age brings to it. Towns like Crestone, Colorado, and Sedona, Arizona, and Taos, New Mexico a bit. Casitas, New Mexico a bit. And now I hear Eden, Arizona a little bit, where these hot springs I used to go to, where frogs with DMT in their neck skin live. People lick them. I knew someone who tried to do that. That Bermuda Triangle book again. It's just so weird that Carlos Allende's personal annotated books came into this collection. What the heck? There's so much like lore around this guy and books about this person. This person's like ufology famous. And the story of Morris Jessup really is wild, who his story is intertwined with. Because Morris Jessup supposedly killed himself kind of abruptly after making all these other plans with different people. And it was while he was writing about the Philadelphia experiment, and the Navy was doing an investigation of... I know the government does shady stuff. I used to have this old button from like the 70s on my bulletin board that said, sure, you can trust the government. Ask any Indian. Like, there was a lawyer here in Albuquerque who represented cases against the cops and local figures, and all these politicians and politically connected people stormed all over her place and took stuff right after she died. It was like documented. There were like reporters there going like, what are you doing? What's going on? Why? You can't do this. And her suicide was so fishy, it wasn't a suicide. So stuff goes down, you know. Art's based in something, all the most sensational stuff. Robert McKee is writing this book, and as represented in the movie adaptation, real life is full of event. Too much event, honestly. I'm like trying to write a memoir and stuff keeps happening. This is a really interesting book. When I read all the books about Roswell, at that time, I know there's more since, but at the time I read all of them and owned almost all of them. Working on that project with John LeMay, author John LeMay. That never happened. I still think Roswell, You Decide would have been a really good book. And I think that format could be really powerful. Two authors taking two sides on an issue, alternating chapters on the same topics. Like in Roswell, You Decide, like the skeptical chapter would have been like, this was a time when there were all these different sightings happening, and there were Cold War fears, et cetera, et cetera. And then like the believer chapter would have been like, here are the witnesses that were there, that were reported and quoted, et cetera. But this is interesting because it contains all these files from Fate magazine, which is one of these weird Fortean magazines. They exist out there with just really strange stuff. Sometimes they exist in Multiple Strange Fears. There's one I've seen in like magazine shops before called like Bizarre that has like a pinup overlap type element to it. But people are interested in weird stuff. Fortean societies exist, and Stanton Friedman. So yeah, he was an original promoter of the Roswell story. Kevin Randall, he's written so many Roswell books. What I loved about this book, when I was reading so much about it all, was when you read a lot of work on a single topic, and it doesn't matter if it's something weird like this or anything, you really hear a lot of repetition, and it gets boring. And that is how you learn, but ITs, what does that mean? This book mixes it up. This is all the weird alternate things. They were actually a version. It's so cool when a story, whether it's true or not, exists in society for a long time, and all the different variations it takes on as its lore changes and new things are added and new speculations are made. Because in some of these articles that are collected here, they're like, I think the aliens came up from underground. They were an underground species that was here from before humanity. Or I think they're extra-dimensional beings that can move between planes, and here's my evidence for that, blah, blah, blah. Roswell may not have delivered all we hoped for. Yeah, there's such a sad tone that creeps into later Roswell incident research. A lot of it doesn't check out. But then sometimes you hear these flickers of story and reality, and it's just like, who the heck knows? John LeMay, who is a Roswell writer, I think we'll get to a book of his or two. He was always like, I just have heard so many anecdotes. I believe it because I just heard so many people talk about it. And he would write about really obscure Roswell-related stories, like a ghost of a Roswell alien supposedly haunts a Roswell nursing home. I'm like, that's so good. No one talks about these weird stories. One of my favorite Roswell stories I ever wrote about and researched was about a crying Jesus picture that cried blood there in the 70s and made headlines. I wrote an article about it called The Other Roswell Incident. Mentioned in that book, The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. Get to that later. But yeah, this book, kept it. It survived the purge. Like, if I ever write about Roswell, I definitely want the things that contains. Probably will. Most of my unfinished writing projects are finding life and forms in my memoir. Like My Strange New Mexico is definitely going to be a chapter in book 2 of my book, and I'll alternate columns with bits of writing about what was going on at that time. Maybe Roswell, You Decide would merit a chapter 2. I'm not sure. Louis Theroux, famous travel writer, etc. Son of a famous travel writer. That's so cool. Paul Theroux's the dad. I recently read his book on the South. Louis Theroux, he's a great documentarian too. I've been watching a really interesting documentary he made, very experimental, called My Scientology Movie. And he has like zero access to any Scientologist basically to make his documentary. So he like hires actors to recreate court transcripts and stuff so he can get a feel for it all. Wild. But he's talking about something I felt here, the call of the weird, travels in American subcultures. You can't travel and not have adventures and strangeness and meet people. There's so much that's so unexpected that happens. When I think of every trip, I've been like, something weird happened. Too many. Hitchhiked from Alaska down to America, got a ride with a preacher that thought he was casting demons out of me for days and just yelled exorcist stuff at me the whole time. I cast out the demon of interruption. Canoeing around Lake Powell, my friend and I, in the dark, stumbled upon people doing like a foot washing ceremony. They were Episcopalians, and they were insane and so drunk. They invited us to join them, and they were so drunk that they quickly forgot that they invited us to join them and got really hostile. Oh, when I was hitchhiking with a hippie girlfriend in Alaska one time, we stayed at a house. This was this commune of half punks, half hippies in Alaska. So much weird stuff happened there. I've written multiple things about it. Like we had to tear apart their whole house looking for the all-seeing eye, which was a marble. It's so many guns and things like that, just machine guns on every wall. And said, my sister put a curse on us, black magic, and all our pets are dead, but we're going to bring them back to life and break the curse. And she opened up the freezer, and there was a silver tray with an iguana and 4 dead puppies on it. I think it was the most jaw-dropping thing I've ever seen in my life. So I think to travel is to kind of get onto the wavelength of the weird sometimes, you know? I think Hunter S. Thompson kind of understood it. Just like, I also, you know, you stop fetishizing the weird and thinking about the weird. TBH, everything is weird, you know? Starting with a Nietzsche quote. You may lie with your mouth, but with the mouth you make as you do, so you nonetheless tell the truth. Okay. Table of contents isn't giving us much. But, yeah, cool. My online identity used to be Mike Strange. I used that name for many years. Have thousands of comments at avclub.com, or a lot anyway, over years and years. Oh, wow. Yeah, I always pick up any books about Guatemala. During my first marriage, pre-children, we lived in Guatemala for a while, in the town of Xela and the rainforest community of Colombia. And we traveled a bunch through there. Once I could speak Spanish. But like green chili in New Mexico. Oh no, that comes from Mexico. What's from Guatemala? Oh, Central America is just so fascinating. That's a wild history. It's so close to southwestern U.S. history, and there's definitely overlap between everything from species to tribes to, you know, the geography is all connected, of course. The historical geography of the Cuchumatan Highlands, 1500 to 1821. Nice. Well, now that, why is this in the weird books? This shouldn't be in the weird books. Okay, this one's getting moved. On out of space. Oh, I used to be so interested in snake handling churches. Got a couple of snake handling churches books here. Super interesting. Where is Salvation at Sand Mountain? I could have sworn I had that book. I've rebought that book so many times, I just cannot hold on to it. It was in my backpack once on the hike across the country when it got stolen. The universe is like, this guy will definitely join him if I let him read about this too much. That's what happens in the book Salvation on Sand Mountain. This guy starts writing about this snake handling church in like Georgia. I might be getting that wrong. Then he gets obsessed and he realizes, you know what? They actually like are an example of like willpower or faith or something. They really are getting bit by snakes sometimes and being okay. And they do put their hands on hot stoves and they do drink strychnine. There are little tricks, things here and there. When they pick up snakes, they generally grab them from behind the head, etc. But, you know, National Geographic did that study a long time ago. I remember watching a documentary about it in the 80s where they would tell people they were going to get touched by a red hot poker and then touch them with an ice cube and many people's skin would still blister. Like, the mind is powerful. But in Salvation at Sand Mountain, the author starts researching the group because this preacher has just been accused of murder because his wife died sticking her hand into a snake case. And yeah, he probably used that to do that. He seemed like the type a bit. But during this investigation, he starts going to these church services and being kind of amazed by them a little bit. And they also have these incredible like electric psychedelic rock bands. So then he finds out that like his great grandfather literally founded this church that he's going to. He's like, what? So he joins the church and becomes like a believer. It's Hunter S. Thompson has nothing on that author. That person is gonzo AF. But so that book left me really wanting, and also just hearing about them walking across the South in 2001. And so we got to Jasper, Georgia, which is one of the main towns where they have snake handling churches. And we found one of the snake handling churches there. Oh, and before that, we'd had a number of interactions with people collecting snakes out in the middle of nowhere. We'd find these buckets in the Northern Everglades that would be like 3-gallon buckets buried in the ground up to their lip. And then they'd have strips of metal leading up to them in the ground. And snakes would hit those strips of metal and slide along them and fall into these buckets. And sometimes you'd just find a snake in one of these buckets rattling at you. One day there was this big group of people and they looked like deliverance extras, no offense. We were out there with like leather sacks collecting the snakes out of these buckets. And we're all, what are you guys doing with those? Are you like wildlife biologists or something? Me and the other hikers were talking with them. One guy was all, we don't have to tell you. But I'm pretty sure he was collecting for a snake handling church. So in Jasper, Georgia, we found the snake handling church, and they had a great like sign and mural outside, and we were hanging around all day while they were having a church service, and we could hear the band, which was this amazing like psychedelic rock band, just playing super loud inside. I don't know how they ended up having psychedelic loud rock bands, but what a funny detail. I mean, how is there not a snake handling cult movie yet? It should be about Salvation on Sand Mountain, probably. Here's a more academic psychological perspective. I got this at Coas Books back in the day. Look at this amazing cover. Coas Books in Las Cruces is an all-time great bookstore of the world. One of the best there's ever been. Anthropology, Religion, and the Snakebite Survivors Club. This is not just about snake handling churches, but I know it has a chapter or two about it. I used to be more the sort of person that would just track down copies about every subject I was interested in, of every book about it, you know. This is a remnant of that time. Oh, I know why I have this book. It's because it has a chapter on the Penitentes, and it probably mentions the journalist Carl Taylor, who was killed in 1936. You know, big part of New Mexico history, the Penitentes. Like a lot of these little towns out here lacked civic structure. They didn't really have anything. Like they wouldn't have a sheriff or a mayor or like, you know, basic services and so on. And so churches often filled that void and created that structure. You had these little mini village-sized theocracies, really. But also they needed some sort of a structure, you know. And the Penitentes were kind of the Catholic Church was about to officially recognize them as a sect when the murder of Carl Taylor happened in 1936 and set that back a couple of decades. I mean, yeah, this group, they trace back to like the 1300s in Europe, and Spain brought these penitential practices all over the world. They brought it to the Philippines too. You know, whipping yourself, hanging yourselves on crosses at Easter, tied up, I guess. Throwing yourselves on beds of cactus needles and broken glass, suffering to better understand the suffering of Jesus. Maybe you have to try metaphorically or something. Still, the practice persisted. Or if you read about like the mad monk of Las Cruces, this guy who lived out in a cave down there, a lot of things are named after him. He would like tie like barbed wire type wire around his body and just make himself suffer. He was of this tradition. I'm so evil for existing. I'm so dirty. Then everything's evil. You're getting real Gnostic here. Yeah, that's my point, and I'm part of it. Well, maybe you could not be like that. But there's real poetry. If you watch that movie, The Last of the Penitentes, it's interesting because it mixes in archival, like documentary footage of the Penitentes with it, taken illegally. Cost the camera person some fingers. They were not afraid to get violent, and, you know. I don't see anything about Carl Taylor in here, but yeah. Check out those 2 episodes of my podcast, City on the Edge. The Carl Taylor murder is a really interesting story. You don't have to go way back. They're literally the 2 first episodes, and there's like 100+ episodes now. It says Mormonism in it. Interesting. The sex sects. The conscience cults. The search for utopia. Huh. Yeah, I went on a cult book buying binge for a while. I was writing a lot about cults. This may have been part of it, but this book is so pulpy, but it's so unforgettable. Like, this is probably true. I mean, all of it. Even though it's kind of like got that New York Post sensational tone to it, it's also pretty well researched. Some of its bigger claims might not have been true. Like, did they literally set a nuclear bomb off in the Australia desert that they got from former USSR scientists, this cult? I don't know. But this group started as a literal yoga group that had flyers around that you could take tabs from. I think about this sometimes when I like see these sorts of things on college bulletin boards. And then the group became the deadly cult behind the Tokyo sarin gassings, and they sarin gassed a neighborhood and the subway and the abuse that this guy brought to his group. I don't think the visually impaired community wants anything to do with this guy. No, he's half-sighted. Not half blind. That's what you guys, they'd probably say. Oh my gosh. I don't know if I still have it, but Murakami's Underground should really be over here with this book. That's interviews with surviving Aum Shinrikyo members. It's one of the most insane true stories I've ever read, though, honestly. They all had to wear electrode-shocking caps to shock their thoughts into order. I wanted to buy one online, but they're way expensive. Like, as a curiosity, like, that's wild. This group fascinates me. But here's what a dangerous cult looks like. Big time. But Underground is weird. That's a book that does complicate the story because you see that there were a lot of like sympathetic. I don't know. You can have intelligent people in any movement, it seems like. But is it intelligence misapplied? Oh, yeah, when they raided the headquarters. This book's incredible. I got a lot of people to read this book, and they were all like, whoa. You're never indifferent to the subject of Shinrikyo after you read this book. Like, that guy's horrible. They're terrible. What an interesting story. It's too insane. It's bigger than like the biggest movie. Because the Tokyo sarin gassings, that could have gone very differently. That was supposed to be step one on a taking over the world plan. If everybody had opened their sarin gas packets at the right spots and only a lot of people deciding not to do it made it much less worse than it was. Because there were like good-hearted searchers in this group that just were looking for meaning and were credulous in the wrong ways. But if it had been pulled off in the way that it had been planned, they would have sarin gassed beneath Japanese headquarters, basically, like their parliament or whatever. I don't know about what's their government, the Diet. It would have been beneath all that. And they would have gone up and taken over, and they wanted to have a nuclear war with America to fulfill some prophecy, have Japan use nuclear weapons. They would take over Japan to take over America. I mean, they really were the cult at the end of the world. It's fascinating. Well worth the $8 from Coas Books back in the day. I've had this book for like more than 20 years. I guess we're like best friends. All right. Well, thanks for going with me through the weird books, folks. Not everyone's cup of tea, probably, but it's good to have some strangeness in our lives, I think. This video is already a bit long, so do another part some other time. Later.